Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today for this timely update on the recent developments from Israel and the region. My name is Adam Odesser. I'm director of the Dr. Stuart Lesson's Israel Action Center at the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. The JCRC serves as the public affairs and community relations arm of the organized Jewish community here in our nation's capital, representing more than 100 100 institutions and synagogues throughout our region. And a key component of our work is to empower, train, and mobilize our community to engage with and advocate for Israel. And this continues to be critically important during the time we are in. This webinar is going to be moderated by our JCRC's Israel co-chair, Larry Haas. Larry is a former senior White House official and is an award-winning journalist and is also currently a senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the American Foreign Policy Council. So Larry, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce our speaker and begin our conversation. Again, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thanks to the JCRC, of course, for holding this event. Thanks to all of you for being here. I understand we have a very robust number of people in our audience, and thanks, of course, to our distinguished speaker, who I will introduce in a moment. I'm going to speak for just a couple of minutes to frame our discussion. I'm going to then introduce our speaker, and I'm going to begin our conversation with a few questions, but we want to get to as many questions that you have as possible. You have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and you should feel free to begin populating it with questions at any time you want, starting now. And I'm looking forward greatly to your questions and obviously our conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we meet this afternoon, we're 19 months into both a war in Gaza and a transformed Middle East. Iran and the terrorist groups in its axis of resistance, who thought that Hamas's slaughter of October 7th would mark the beginning of the end for Israel, are now severely weakened. But while Israel has largely destroyed Hamas, severely weakened Hezbollah, and exposed the vulnerability of Iran, it continues to face enormous challenges both at home and abroad. For instance, Israel is reoccupying Gaza, plans to relocate Palestinians to the south, while Hamas continues to hold hostages and now says it's no longer interested in a truce. Israel continues to strike Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon and conduct military operations in Syria to try to prevent future threats from emerging. At the same time, President Trump is trying to negotiate a new nuclear deal with Iran, which has Israeli leaders worried about what such a deal might look like. And while Israel and the Houthi rebels continue to strike one another, President Trump just announced that he's going to end the U.S. bombing of the Houthis because they promised to stop targeting ships in the area. Meanwhile, Israeli politics remain as turbulent as ever as the governing coalition advances controversial judicial reforms and struggles with whether to enact military exemptions for the ultra-Orthodox community. So we've got lots to talk about, and we are very fortunate to be able to discuss that and more with Barak Ravid. Barak is a political reporter and Middle East expert for Axios, who covers foreign policy and who covered the 2024 presidential election. He also writes for Walla News in Israel, and he's a foreign and political commentator on CNN, where perhaps you've seen him. He is the author of the book Trump's Peace, The Abraham Accords and the Reshaping of the Middle East, which The Guardian called a blockbuster and Haaretz called fascinating and eye-opening. Barak is a native of Israel and a former IDF intelligence officer who now lives in Washington. So Barak, welcome, and thank you very much. Everyone's looking forward to hearing from you. So let me get things started, if I may, with a broad question that you can take wherever you like. 19 months in, how do you assess the state of Israeli national security compared to where it was on October 6th of 2023?
Hi, Larry, and thank you for everybody who is on this call. Just one thing about your introduction. If maybe I missed it, but Did you say that Hamas said it does not want a truce anymore?
That was the latest news that I read over the last day or two. So please feel free to dispute it if you hear
Yeah,
other.
no, just that's not, as far as I understand, what Hamas is saying is that they don't want just a temporary ceasefire. They want, a deal that would lead to the release of all remaining 59 hostages in return for, a permanent ceasefire and the end to the war. And when the Israeli government at the moment doesn't want a permanent end to the war or a deal that would lead to the release of all hostages, but prefers a temporary arrangement that includes a 45-day ceasefire in return for release of something between 8 to 10 hostages. That's I think if I can sum up the gaps between the parties. And to your question, I think that when you look at everything that happened since October 7th, I think that um, Israel's national security has a lot of similarities to October 6th, meaning that um, the same political instability that led Israel to October 7th, the same um, attitude and the same state of mind that ignored a lot of the warnings I think we can see it today again after 18 months of war. So while there's no doubt that many of Israel's enemies, have either been defeated or taken a huge blow in the last 18 months, and you all know it. I don't need to repeat. I think that the current situation in Israeli society at the moment is a matter of concern. There's a significant, I think, significant trend in Israeli society of uh, lack of legitimacy of the government in big parts of society. In almost every poll, you can see that between 60 to 70% of Israelis say they want to end the war in return for a deal that would lead to the release of the hostages. When the government policy to continue on the war and not cut the deal with Hamas gets support from between 20 to 25%, something like that on a good day. Um, and that, I think that situation, in addition to um, the burnout of hundreds of thousands of reservists and their families from serving between 200 to 400 days in reserve service since the war started, in addition to the economic situation in the country that has become worse, in addition to the fact that you still have tens of thousands of refugees around the country, in addition to the fact that the government is trying to pass legislation that would exempt ultra-Orthodox from military service, in addition to the fact that the government has relaunched the judicial overhaul. I think when you put all of that together, you really get a very grim picture of Israel's national security, because it's more than just the question of whether what's the situation of our enemies. I think that the question many times is, what is how how strong is the Israeli society and how stable it is, and it's, I think, pretty unstable. And military-wise, Israel is now, after 18 months, still without any clear result in Gaza, getting bogged down in the Gazan mud. It has IDF forces inside Lebanon. It has IDF forces inside Syria. Um, the war isn't really winding down. It is quite the contrary. The government is on the cusp of expanding the war.
Right.
And when when you just see no end to this, um, I think this would, further destabilize the situation inside the country.
So you mentioned at the beginning of that, and thank you, that's a terrific overview. You mentioned at the beginning of your response, you said the same mentality exists as existed on October 6th. So on October 7th, my understanding, if speaking to a lot of Israelis and American officials who speak with Israelis, was that it really was a kind of a shock to the system that there was such an intelligence failure. So what is it about this mentality that you don't think has changed?
October 7th didn't happen, uh, in my opinion. I mean, it did happen because of an intelligence failure, but that's a very narrow way to look at it.
Okay.
Um, it's the war happened because of a 15-year government policy of strengthening Hamas.
Mm.
That's it is clear. Um, and disregarding disregarding the need to maintain um, a some kind of social and national cohesion within the country, and the need to support the country's institutions. In the year that led to October 7th, the government took steps to undermine the democratic institutions, to undermine, the basic social national understandings within society, and do it in a unilateral, aggressive way. Um, and that led to the country being totally consumed in its domestic political crisis, and not paying enough attention to what has been going on outside of its borders. And while Israel's intelligence services failed miserably on October 7th, they also warned the government several times during the year before that what the government is doing, and the domestic situation in Israel, is encouraging Israel's enemies to gang up on it. And the government ignored the warnings, and said that there's nothing to worry about. Literally several days before October 7th, Prime Minister Netanyahu and his wife published a video of them on vacation wearing rosy glasses, literally wearing rosy glasses, several days before October 7th. So I think the same state of mind that was back then has returned big time in the last few weeks and months, when the government relaunched the judicial overhaul and basically launched a war on a new front. And this is not my words, this is Prime Minister Netanyahu saying we have a war in a new front against the deep state.
Right.
So, when that's the situation, then I think we're back on October 6th, big time.
Well, I want to return to Gaza. We've got a question, and I've got a question, but you're talking a lot about domestic politics at the moment, and obviously how it manifests itself overseas. So let me ask you, do you buy the argument that because of his political and legal challenges, that the last thing Benjamin Netanyahu wants at the moment is peace?
Well, I mean, it's it's like I have to say, it's like it's a very shallow argument.
Okay.
While I don't disagree with it in like factually, it's like the argument is just too shallow. It's I mean, uh, what do you mean? What do you mean he doesn't want peace? He wants peace on his terms.
Okay.
It's like everybody, his terms are completely unrealistic. Okay.
Okay.
And I think that at the moment, it's not about whether Netanyahu wants peace or not. It's about Netanyahu trying to survive politically. This is the main issue and the main driver to everything you see. It's political survival of this government, which is highly unpopular, which has lost a lot of its legitimacy, which 70% of the public wants to see this government replaced. And when this is all happening, while Netanyahu is on trial for 3 cases of corruption, and while his closest advisors are being investigated for getting payments from Qatar in the middle of the war. So this is the environment. So it's not about if Netanyahu wants peace or not. It's not, that's not on the table at the moment anyway.
Okay.
It is about what is driving what you see. And what is driving what you see is political survival. And it's not my opinion only. It's 60% of the Israeli society says that Netanyahu's decision making regarding Gaza are driven by political survival.
Okay. So we have a question from one of our viewers. Are there any Palestinians who are anti-Hamas that can work with the Israeli government? And it says to solve this, but I think what they mean is to move ahead in a peaceful way for both sides. What do you think?
Well, I know about a big group of Palestinians who hate Hamas. They're called the Palestinian Authority. Um, the Palestinian Authority that the Israeli government signed numerous agreements with, and that is while it's not going to join the Likud anytime soon, does not support the destruction of Israel and does not support using military force in order to settle the conflict. So, but that's the whole point. For 15 years, the Netanyahu government's policy was to weaken the Palestinian Authority and to strengthen Hamas.
Mhm.
Uh, it was Bezalel Smotrich, now the finance minister, who said that the Palestinian Authority is a liability and Hamas is an asset. He said it, not me. And that's that's the policy. That's the policy. And when that's the policy, you get a Palestinian Authority that is very weak, that can barely function, and that is just there to be a punching bag for Israeli politicians that wants to say that it's somebody else's fault. And you get Hamas with long-range missiles and a commando division of 4,000 people that can invade into Israel and commit the worst massacre since the Holocaust.
So we're talking a lot about the approach of this government. So let me ask you a question about potential missed opportunities if they were to move in a different direction. To what extent do you think Israel is missing opportunities for diplomatic gains and maybe even more Arab-Israeli peace deals, including, of course, the crown jewel that Israel says it wants, which is Saudi Arabian normalization? Missing these opportunities by doubling down in Gaza and southern Lebanon and doing its thing in Syria.
Well, I'm one of those who thought that even on October 6th, when the Biden administration has been negotiating with Israel and Saudi Arabia a possible normalization deal, that even back then it was a stretch. That,
Okay.
like you can't, I mean, the thought that the government, Israeli government, that includes Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, and led by Benjamin Netanyahu, will that Benjamin Netanyahu is the most liberal and centrist member of this government. To think that this government will be able to reach the bar that the Saudis have put forward, which is a time-bound, irreversible path for a Palestinian state, I think that was a stretch in the first place. After October 7th, it's not a stretch, it's just a fantasy.
Right.
And today, I think that as long as the Gaza war is going on, it's just a completely irrelevant issue.
Okay. Well, I do want to invite people to send more questions if they'd like. I see one has just come in. Let me ask a question as I read that one while you're answering. Um, so President Trump is considered both in Israel and here in the United States a strong supporter of Israel, unless you want to correct me on that. But do his efforts to strike a new nuclear deal with Iran, and his recent decision to stop airstrikes against the Houthis, give you any pause in terms of what a deal might look like and the fact that, he's backing away from this policy of trying to contain the Houthis? Is there any, how do you interpret that?
So those are two, I think, separate issues.
Okay.
I think um, when it comes to the Iran deal, I still don't see a deal. I think it's very early. I don't think Trump himself decided what he wants. He is giving contradictory statements about how a deal should look like and what he's willing to accept and what he's not willing to accept. And so I think this process is really in the very early stages. That's one thing. About the Houthis, I think it's really it was very concerning that, or at least that's what I hear from Israeli officials, that Israeli officials were extremely concerned by the fact that they were kept in the dark about the ceasefire with the Houthis and the fact that the ceasefire does not include attacks on Israel or on Israeli ships in the Red Sea.
Right.
And I think that you see from Netanyahu's silence the kind of bind he find himself in because he aligned himself completely with Trump
Right.
uh, and and he can't back off from the situation and he can't and he doesn't want to say anything to get himself into a confrontation with Trump. So he's silent on a thing that has direct implications for Israel's security. Um, and I think, each of us here on the call who has a pulse can imagine, what Netanyahu would have done if Joe Biden announced a ceasefire with the Houthis without, you know, letting Israel know, without consultation, and without including attacks on Israel in the ceasefire.
Yes, no doubt. So let me ask you a follow-up. How dangerous more dangerous does that make the situation between Israel and the Houthis, whether the United States stepping away seems to give them more license, maybe there'll be less fear on the part of the Houthis, maybe Iran will be more encouraged to support the Houthis. What do you see as the potential danger here?
I don't think there's a big danger to be honest. I
Okay,
mean, the Houthi attacks are mostly an irritant for now. Um, they're, while you can never stop and intercept all the missiles, one of them landed in in Ben Gurion Airport and led many airlines to cancel their flights, including Delta and United. So again, I'm not saying it's not a problem, but it's not like um, it's not like a huge threat on the country. It's just an irritant that has very negative implications, and that I think we saw clearly how the Houthis are not really can't really be deterred, or that it's very hard to deter them. And Israel cannot sustain ongoing strikes in Yemen, 2,000 kilometers away. It will just be another front where the Israeli military gets bogged down. And I think that it's just another signal that as long that, when there was a ceasefire in Gaza, the Houthis didn't fire missiles at Israel. And I think it's clear that this will be the case if there's be a ceasefire in Gaza again. So I just don't see any solution to the Houthi missile attacks as long as the war in Gaza is going on.
Okay. So let me turn to something else that I mentioned we have a question about, and that has to do with Iran and its nuclear program. We've got the United States saying multiple things about what would be acceptable, and most recently, President Trump taking a hard line, but previously suggesting enrichment would be okay up to certain levels, suggesting a civilian nuclear program would be okay, but nothing beyond that. In any case, what the question is, should Israel do regarding Iran if the United States remains unclear in its goals, or, of course, continues to pursue an agreement that you think is unlikely to be reached?
Um, well, Israel can't do anything because Netanyahu, as I said, he's not gonna go against Donald Trump. I think he's gonna try and influence as much as possible. I think we all saw with the case of the Houthi ceasefire that Netanyahu's influence is not very big.
Hmm.
But again, I just think it's I think a nuclear deal between Iran and the US will be an extremely difficult thing to achieve. And I, at the moment, I'm not giving too much chances of it happening.
Okay. So, changing directions, I've got a question here about settler violence. And it's interesting because this is someone who lives in Israel now, who is from the United States, used to live in the Washington, D.C. area. And the question essentially boils down to, is there anything that we Israelis who oppose settler violence in the West Bank can do to stop settler violence and protect the rights of Palestinians under Israeli rule?
I'm not a an advisor for such things. That's from the activism department. I'm just a journalist. So I don't want to I want to give any advice to anybody what to do. But I think it is clear that the big parts of the current government in Israel are certainly not opposed to those attacks, and in some ways are also supportive of those attacks. So that's the reality. That's the
Well,
reality.
can you
There's a
put
campaign by the government at the moment of decreasing the authorities of the Shin Bet in dealing with settler violence.
can you tell us, can you put in perspective the seriousness of settler violence for those of us who do not live in Israel? I attended a speech by one of your colleagues, but it was under Chatham House rules, so I shouldn't tell you who, but one of your journalistic colleagues. Uh, and he was very much suggesting it's a minority of a minority of a minority of a minority, but these are very dangerous people. How do you view the settler violence? What's your perspective on it?
You know, the minority are the people who, who conduct the attacks. And obviously, they're the minority, but they have a quite big group of people that give them moral, political, and financial support. We're not talking about like, five people in a cave. This is, the minister in charge of the police was their lawyer.
Mhm.
I mean, the minister of finance was once one of them. Uh, so I mean, there are members of Knesset who were Shin Bet, who are under Shin Bet monitoring. It's not like we're not talking about some fringe thing, it's not the case. This is, and you see in many cases that the IDF either doesn't do anything to stop it, or in some cases soldiers are with the settlers, with the settlers that conduct those attacks and do not stop them. They're there on the scene. So, there are numerous cases where settlers attack Palestinians. There are soldiers on the scene, and at the end of the day, the people who get arrested are the Palestinians. So to say that it's a minority, it's not, it's a minority that gets support from a very, very, very big group of people, and that has political support, financial support, and moral support by members of the government.
And more broadly, with regard to the public, how much how much support would you say the settlers have in their activities?
It's hard to say. To be honest, I don't think that it's a big issue for the average Israeli.
Okay.
It's an issue for a part of the Israeli society that cares about it, but I think that majority of Israelis, especially over the last 18 months, their focus is on completely different things.
Okay. Well, let me go back.
By the way, this is what allows all of that to happen, because this comes in a reality where most of the attention is on Gaza, on Lebanon, on Syria, and then in the West Bank, it's a jungle.
Okay. Let me ask you about Syria, because I think it's something that we in the United States probably understand the least. Can you help our listeners understand what Israel is trying to accomplish in Syria and tell us whether it makes sense to you?
I have to say I'm not sure myself
Okay.
what it's trying to achieve. I don't. I mean, obviously, the policy is to um, not allow extremist jihadists to base themselves on the border in the Golan Heights, and to not allow Turkey to to go into Syria and have its own military station there, limiting Israeli freedom of operation in Syria. That's that's obviously the policy right now. But the way it manifests itself is that um, in a situation where Iran and Hezbollah were kicked out of Syria after the collapse of the Assad regime, the Russians have not completely been kicked out, but their influence diminished. In that situation that serves Israel's interests, the Israeli government decided that now is the time to basically take parts of Syria, and this is continuing, and it seems that even though this was never announced as a policy, what is going on is a slow and gradual um, Israeli involvement in Syria uh, in order to undermine the new, the new government, the new post-Assad government, which, by the way, there are many, many, many question marks over this government, its real policy, its real intentions. So, but while it is completely legitimate and even needed to be super suspicious towards this new government in Syria, what I hear from many people, including inside the IDF and the Ministry of Defense, is that they're not sure that the current policy of bombing Syria every other day is the right way to go, and that it will not, and that the Israeli involvement, growing involvement in Syria, could lead to an overreach that at the end will only hurt Israeli interest and not strengthen them.
Well, in light of that, those who question Israeli policy, but like you, think that there are legitimate reasons to wonder about the true intentions of this government. What do they think the Israeli government should be doing other than what it is currently doing vis-a-vis
Uh,
Syria?
I think one of the things that some people within the government were urging Netanyahu to do is to try and take advantage of the situation in order to have some sort of a dialogue with the new government in Syria, in order to reach understandings that will serve Israel's interests. And especially when it comes to making sure that the Iranians are not back in Syria, or that other terror organizations that were in Syria will not be anywhere near the Israeli border. And I think that the fact that um, that kind of dialogue is not taking place, at least not in not in ways that are you know significant, not just conveying messages on tactical issues or situation on the ground, but on what kind of relationship do we want to have. Okay, I think that gives leaves a vacuum for many other countries to go into. um, so I think that's a mistake.
Do we see evidence of a hardening of attitudes on the part of the new leadership in Syria in response, I mean, towards Israel, in response to the bombing? Do we see, as you just suggested, other countries perhaps seeing opportunities? Do we see any of that kind of thing happening?
I have to say that at least in public, what the Syrian government is saying is, A, we don't want to fight with Israel.
Hmm.
We don't want to have any problems with Israel. We just want them to stop bombing us. That's the current policy. That's what you hear in public. And again, there's no indication I have for any hostile activity from the new Syrian government towards Israel. By the way, maybe it's just because they have bigger fish to fry at the moment. They need to stabilize their government within Syria. The country is unstable. They need to, make sure it doesn't fall apart.
Hmm.
Um, but so I think that you can never know when you cross that line where the other side says, well, you know what, I need to I need to respond somehow to this.
Hmm.
Okay. And I don't think that at the moment a war in Syria or an open front in Syria is something that serves Israel's interest in any way.
Okay, I just want to tell our listeners, our viewers, that we are coming towards the latter part of this webinar, and if they have questions, they should populate the Q&A now because I don't see additional ones, at least on topics that I haven't yet covered. So I think here in the United States we'd be uh, curious to learn more, a little bit more about Israeli politics. You know, here we have presidential elections at set times. There, you've got a parliamentary system, completely different. But can you talk a little bit more about this 60 to 70% of Israelis that oppose the government, and yet, for some reason, Bibi is still there? I'll just say, coincidentally, my first trip to Israel was 1998, and the Prime Minister of Israel was Benjamin Netanyahu. So he's quite the survivor. But in any case, can you tell us just a little bit more about sort of the state of things and how it is that so many people oppose Bibi and he's still the Prime Minister?
Because he got the votes. He got the votes. His coalition has enough as the majority in the Knesset. And as long as it has the majority, there's no way to take them down. It's basic mathematics. And at least and you've seen the polls how the current coalition loses something like between 20 to 25 seats if new elections were held today.
Mhm.
That's a lot. That's a lot. And I think that even people, you've seen the polls, that even people that would say that they are still voting for one of the parties in this coalition, there's still a group that, while it's still voting for the coalition, it doesn't like its policies. Okay, people that say, I'm not happy with the policy of this government, I'm still going to vote Likud or Shas or Smotrich or Ben-Gvir, but I don't like what they're doing. So so I think that even among the voters of the coalition, there's quite big unhappiness about what they're doing.
And so it sort of begs the question about those who do not vote for Netanyahu. What is it? What is it? Is it a fear of the opposition that they would not like the policies and yet still vote Likud or Shas? What's behind that?
I don't know. You have to ask them. I really don't know. As you know, voting is a very personal issue that is influenced by many, many factors, and not all of them are policy. So, it's a matter of identity. It's a matter of, all sorts of social issues. But I think it's and also I think that a lot of people are just afraid of the unknown,
Hmm.
and October 7th just increased that fear, and I can totally understand that. It's totally natural and human thing to feel. And I think they sort of say, I would rather stick to what I know to, you know, than to have something new.
Do you
And
think that's
when the country has been with the same prime minister for 15 years, a lot of people, no, seriously, a lot of people, that's all they know.
right?
There are
Right.
some voters that never knew a reality when there was another prime minister than Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right. Yes. It's been quite a while since we had anything comparable. I guess you'd have to go back to President Roosevelt and, getting elected to a fourth 4-year term, serving a little over 12 years. before he died. Um, what about looking ahead on Israeli politics, the state of the opposition? You said if there were election today, 60 to 70% of, they lose 25 seats, about 70% oppose them. But what is the state of the opposition now, with regard to Knesset, the parties, the possibilities of building a larger coalition?
In one word, bad. In two words, very bad. I think that the current coalition is totally fractured. It's ineffective. It's consumed with inner fighting, and that's why none of the leaders of the opposition today that who is in the Knesset will get a lot of success if elections were held today. That's why you see the two politicians who get the most support, people who are who are in the opposition, not in the coalition, are Naftali Bennett, that is out of politics and is now making his comeback, but he's not in the Knesset, and Yair Golan, who was not didn't run in the previous election and is sort of an outsider who came in and sort of like rehabilitated the Israeli left post October 7th. They're the ones who are getting the most success in the polls because voters who do not want a lot of the voters who do not want the current government are also very disappointed by the leaders of the opposition, and they're looking for somebody else to vote.
So when you say that the
I'm
fear
just
of
saying,
the un
let's maybe do like last question or two because it's like I have to go in a few minutes.
Okay, well, that's fine. I don't have any more, so I'll just finish up with a follow-up and then I'll turn things back to Adam to close things off. When you say that there's fear of the unknown, better go with the person you know than the person you don't. Is that in a general sense, do you think, or is that specifically on the security issue?
Um, I think security is a big part of it, obviously, but again, I think it's Israeli politics have been shaped over the last 20 years by Benjamin Netanyahu.
Hmm.
Israeli society has been shaped by Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli media has been shaped by Benjamin Netanyahu. Um, and when you put all of that together, it's again, there are some people that are are having a hard time imagining or feeling comfortable with a post-Netanyahu reality. I'm not talking about the people who don't want him to be prime minister, but people um, that vote for parties of the coalition, but still oppose some of their policies, but they just don't feel comfortable enough voting for the other side for all sorts of reasons. And in my opinion, one of the reasons is just that Netanyahu's influence on the country as a whole is so big that it just creates a real sense of uncertainty how a post Netanyahu reality would look like.
Okay. Okay. Well, I want to be very respectful of your time. I want to thank you on behalf of everyone. I want to let you get back to your day job. So I'm going to turn this back to Adam and thank everyone for attending this webinar, which I found truly fascinating.
Thank you
Adam?
so much, Larry. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Barak, for being here with us. And thank you, all of you, for being here. Really interesting, fascinating conversation. We will continue to, follow, provide updates on the developments from Israel and the region. And I invite everyone to visit also our website and our social media accounts and follow us for updates. I also want to add one word, of course, for the hostages that we continue to hope and pray for the return of all of them, all the 59 that are still held by Hamas. And once again, thank you all. Thank you, Larry, Barak, and Be well, everyone.